I'll share the screen. So we'll perform an exercise in which we'll be creating two containers. Okay. So for that, one will be the web server, and the other will be the MariaDB database server. We are creating a database server using directly the MariaDB image. Okay, if you can see here, the MariaDB image we are using, and for Apache, what we are doing is we are just building it from a Docker file. So let's create a directory structure. Okay, so I've created multi containers. Let's create a Docker file, cat Docker file. In this Docker file, what we will do is we'll just install Apache, nothing else. We'll be installing only Apache. So we are using Ubuntu as a base image. Okay, we are giving it as a label who created this image, my email address, and the name. We'll just update the packages inside the container and install Apache 2 and start the Apache service. Okay, and by default it works on port 80. So for the just documentation purpose, we're writing here it is exposed on port 80. Okay, so what we have done is we created a multi-container directory, and inside that we are having a Docker file. Now let's create a Docker compose file. Okay, so the Docker compose file, cat docker compose.yml. Okay. So what we are defining in the docker compose.yml is we are defining two services. One is DB server, the other one is a web server. Okay. So as I said, the image for DB servers will be MariaDB. MariaDB is nothing but just like a MySQL, fork of a MySQL. Okay. And the open source one. MySQL is taken over by Oracle now. Okay. So most of the people prefer MariaDB or MySQL now. And for web container, we'll be building it from a Docker file which we created earlier here. Okay, so whenever it reaches here, it will build the image and it will run it. So the web server will run on port 80 on the local host, that is DevOps VM, and inside the container it will be running on port 80. Okay, similarly the service DB will be using port 3306 out on this VM, and to the outside world, that is to the outside world, it will be on the port 3306, and inside the container it always runs on 3306. We are also giving some environmental variables. Okay, so we also need to change this. Okay, so this is not proper. The database name should be something like this. So we'll give it db11 or data 11 we can give. So what it will do is it will set the MySQL root password as password. It will create a MySQL user. It will create a password. Okay, MySQL password as password, and the database it will create as data 11. Okay, so this is the Docker file, and it will also create two volumes. Okay, at this location. So to access that, if we already have, what we will do is we'll just remove its contents if it is already having it. Okay, so yeah, it has some data. So what I'll do is I'll just remove this disk 01 and 02 both. So now both the disks are removed. It was done for the previous batch. Okay, so now what we will do is we have a Docker file, we have a Docker compose file. Okay, now just start the containers using Docker compose up hyphen d. So here we have to root sudo not cat docker compose d. So what it is doing is it started with downloading the MariaDB image. After this, it will build the container using the Docker file for web container. Okay, so it will take some time. So let's wait to finish. it downloaded the MariaDB image. Now it's creating a uh, web container using Docker file. It will take some time. So we can see that it has created two containers, web1 and db1. Let's check a sudo docker compose ps. Okay, we have container. So just do curl localhost, okay, port 80. So it is giving a default page. Okay, it's not the proper page which we want. Okay, so we'll create our own in index.html in the docker volume sudo docker sudo su. Okay, cd var lib docker. So if you remember, the disk one is for disk one will have all the contents of MariaDB. So all these files are of MariaDB, kind of a persistent volume for MariaDB. And in disk 2 will have, it is empty, so we'll create an index.html. So what we'll do is we'll just follow the exercise. In exercise, what we have mentioned is just echo the web page my HTML app. So that's what we'll do here. Okay, just log out, and if I do curl localhost now, I can see my HTML app. So these contents are coming from a persistent volume which is in disk2 index.html. That is the volume which we define in a Docker Compose. Okay, now let's see how to access the MySQL container. Okay, so to access the MySQL container, we need to make sure that MySQL client is installed. So I have already installed it earlier. Okay, so MySQL client is already installed. Just access it. And remember, in Docker Compose file, we had set the MySQL root password as password. Okay, and there we also mentioned in the Docker Compose file that create a database called data 11. Okay, so that is also created. That means both our containers are created, and if you see in the Docker ps, we can also list both the containers. Okay, one is MariaDB and other one is web server. Okay, so just to stop it, what we can do is sudo docker compose down. It will stop and remove the containers. Okay, so if you see now, we don't have anything, everything is empty. So that's it for this exercise.